Good afternoon. Welcome to the Committee on Housing at the Hawaii State Senate. We have two agendas today, a 110 agenda as well as a 120 agenda. And so we'll be starting with the 1:10 p.m. agenda here in conference room 225. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube. In the unlikely event that we have to abruptly end this hearing due to technical difficulties, the committee will reconvene to discuss any outstanding business on Thursday, March 21st at 1 p.m. in this room 225, and a public notice will be posted on the legislature's website. We will be enforcing a 1 minute per testifier time limit. I'd like to welcome our Vice Chair, Senator Hashimoto, to today's meeting. We'll get started with SCR 6, approving the dedication of Kukui'a Street, Lahaina, Hawaii, to the County of Maui. Our first testifier is DLNR in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair Kevin Moore, Land Division. The department stands on its written testimony in support, and we're available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have HHFDC in support.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, we stand on our testimony in support.
Thank you. We have DBED in support and Maui County Council Chair Alice Lee in support. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on SCR 6? If not, any questions or discussion? Okay, our next measure today is SCR 45 and SR 33, urging the Director of Finance to adopt administrative rules to define beneficial effects to the state in Section 38-2 Hawaii Revised Statutes to include the financing of housing. We have one testifier, HHFDC in support. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on SCR 45 or SR 33? If not, any questions, members? Okay, next is SCR 56 and SR 45, urging the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation to adopt administrative rules to prohibit rental housing revolving fund loan forgiveness. Our first testifier, our only testifier, is HHFDC with comments.
And our testimony offering comments.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on SCR 56 and SR 45? Okay, if not, any questions? Chair has a question. And if you could identify yourself for the record.
Dean Minakami, Executive Director of the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation.
Thank you. So rental housing revolving fund loans are secured by the project, by the building?
Yes, by the building and the land.
So do your administrative rules require that when forgiving a loan that you would foreclose on and repossess the project?
No. I'm not sure if we've ever forgiven a loan. There was a time during the downturn of the economy when the state was having or developers were having a hard time selling state tax credits. So there were some special financing mechanisms in place at that time. We'd have to look and see at least the terms of those loans and if they're from RHRF and if they considered forgiving a loan in that case.
Without repossessing the building?
Yes. Yeah.
Why would they not have repossessed the building?
I'm not sure. This was many years ago, so I'm not. This is something we have to look into now.
Today, can you foresee any circumstance where you would want to forgive a loan without repossessing the building?
No, that would cover most circumstances where someone couldn't repay their RHRF loan. We would seek compensation.
Okay. Would it make a difference if the project is not on state and county land?
It's a matter of, I guess, semantics. If it's on private land, you're not technically, I think, forgiving the loan. You're just taking the property and just not getting paid back. It's not necessarily forgiving. But the end result is the same. The state will take possession of the property in return for the developer not paying back the balance.
But in your opinion, so that's kind of what I'm getting at. taking back just the improvements on state and county land would not be, that would still be considered forgiveness as opposed to satisfaction or whatever other term would be used?
I believe on state and county land, yes.
Okay, so I mean, the chair is inclined to amend this to urge you to provide for loan forgiveness only if HHFDC repossesses the project, whether it's just the improvements on state or county land, or if it's, you know, the land and the improvements.
That would cover most foreseeable events in which we would seek to forgive a loan.
Okay. You would like to continue to have the power to make grants out of the rental housing revolving fund?
Grants were only made that we know of initially for capacity building when rental housing revolving fund was first stood up, and we have not issued grants since then, but there might be a circumstance where we may want to issue grants from RHRF, but it is not something that we would, it's not a normal course of business for us.
Can you identify any circumstances under which you would want to issue grants in the future?
Not right now. It would have to be something that we cannot foresee at the moment.
Okay. The chair is also inclined to urge you to prohibit giving grants out of the rental housing revolving fund. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move next to SCR 57 and SR 46, requesting HHFDC to adopt administrative rules that preempt the counties from imposing residential income requirements on housing projects subject to section 201H-38 HRS that are lower than those adopted or established by the state. And for SCR 57, we have one testifier at HHFDC.
Seminar testimony offering supporting and comments.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify on SCR 57 and SR 46? Chair has a question. So is it your opinion that HRS 201H-38 allows county legislative bodies to modify projects in any way?
Well, they can modify the characteristics of the project. They have in the past modified the design of the building, AMI restrictions. So it is the purview of the county council to approve or modify the project.
So are you also saying that in order to, if we wanted to, if AMI were the only thing that any modification of that county authority, including a restriction on their ability to modify AMI restrictions, would require a statutory change?
That was the advice we're given by our AG, that because the statute allows the county's authority to modify a project, which includes AMI modifications, we cannot adopt administrative rules to prohibit them from doing so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move next to SCR 58 and SR 47. Urging HHFDC to adopt administrative rules to create a process under section 201H-38 HRS for housing projects exclusively for sale or rent to qualified residents as defined in section 201H-32 who are deemed to be moderate income households. And for this measure, our first testifier is HHFDC with comments.
Stand on testimony offering comments.
Stand on the testimony, and then Galen Fox in support. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on SCR 58 and SR 47? Okay, if not, Chair has a further question for HHFDC. Do you believe that you have the authority to adopt rules to achieve the purpose of this resolution?
Actually, after speaking to our AG, is something that we'd have to consult with them further on, because 201H-38 does specify the process for 201H, for projects to receive exemptions. So this might be a measure where the AG might also say that a statute amendment would be necessary.
But the existing income restriction exists only in the rules and not in the
Right.
statute.
Which is
So,
which is why we'd have to consult with the AG to determine if we could do it by admin rule.
okay, I mean, I just, if it's an admin rule that requires it in the first place, I feel like another admin rule could modify that.
But the process for 238 exemptions is set forth in statute. So I'm not sure if we could add a second pathway that differs from what's in statute.
Couldn't you just add an alternative to the
We would
income
have,
restriction?
we would have to look at, see if that could be added into the application process.
But you would certainly have the authority to do that.
We can modify the application process, yes, but this would be a fairly significant change. So we would have to see if we could implement a change like this without a statutory change. Because this would be a policy level change.
Right, but you set this policy by rule in the first place.
Yes.
So there would be nothing stopping you from changing it by rule.
Oh, we would have to check with our AG to see if we could do this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, and welcome to Committee Member Senator Aquino. Our final measure on this agenda is SCR 60 and SR 49, urging HHFTC to develop a plan to build 100,000 homes over the next 10 years. We have one testifier, HHFTC with comments.
Testimony offering comments.
Thank you very much. Any questions or discussion on this? Okay, if not, that brings us to the end of this agenda. I think we're ready to do some decision making unless members want to go into recess. Okay. All right, so we'll start with SCR 6. The chair's recommendation will be to pass this measure with amendments. There are technical and non-substantive amendments from SMA. So for SCR 6, chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Chair votes aye, Vice Chair votes aye. Senator Aquino.
Aye.
Senator Kanuha is excused. Senator Owa is excused, and we'll just note that they're excused for the rest of the agenda unless they are in attendance. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Our next measure is SCR 45 and SR 33. Chair's recommendation again will be to pass with amendments with technical and non-substantive amendments from SMA. And chair votes aye.
Chair votes aye, Vice Chair votes aye. Any members voting with reservations? Any member voting no? With all others excused. Oh, aye from Senator Kanuha. Senator Aquino, and then Senator Owa is excused, and Chair, your motion is adopted.
Thank you, and welcome to Senator. Thank you, Chair. Our next measure is SCR 56 and SR 45. Chair's recommendation will be to pass this measure with amendments. There are technical and non-substantive amendments from SMA. Also, will provide for loan forgiveness only if HHFDC repossesses the project, and also finally to urge the prohibition of grants from the fund. Any questions or discussion, members? If not, so for SCR 56 and SR 45, Chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Members voting with reservations, and the members voting no, with all others voting aye, recommendations adopted.
Thank you. And at this time, we'd also like to welcome Senator Owa. Next, SCR 57 and SR 46. Having heard the testimony from HHFDC, the chair would like to defer this measure. Any discussion, members? Moving on to SCR 58 and SR 47. Chair's recommendation will be to pass this measure with amendments. There are technical and non-substantive amendments from SMA. And chair votes aye. Any questions or discussion?
Members, noting the presence of all members, any members voting with reservations, any members voting no, with all others voting aye, recommendations adopted.
Thank you. For SCR 60 and SR 49, the chair's recommendation is to pass with amendments. To include HHFDC's suggestion to address factors including but not limited to insufficient infrastructure, restrictive land use and zoning policies, lengthy and complex regulatory processes, community opposition, and high construction and financing costs. And in addition, in the committee report, we'll note the pro-housing grant application that could help fund a plan like this. Any questions or discussion, members? Okay, so for SCR 60 and SR 49, the recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Members, any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? With all others voting aye, recommendations adopted.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the 1:10 PM agenda. I think we can just move straight to the 1:20 PM agenda next.
Yes.
And I'll hand it off to Vice Chair Hashimoto to lead us on that agenda.
Thank you, Chair. So members, we're moving to the 1:20 agenda. Just wanted to note that we are not going to take decision-making today. So this is just more of a kind of going through the testimony, and then we'll have some questions. So just for your planning purposes, so that you know that. So the first item on the agenda is SCR 217 and SR 193, urging the Federal Emergency Management Agency to utilize funds for non-congregate housing for infrastructure and development needs for affordable rental housing. First up, we have the County of Maui in support. I don't think they're on Zoom. I think that's the only ones that are signed up for this reso. Anyone in the audience wishing to testify on SCR 217, SR 193? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to SCR 226 and SR 202, requesting the governor in collaboration with the County of Maui to provide a clear strategy for housing addressing the short and long-term housing needs for residents displaced by the August 2023 Maui wildfires. First up, we have the Hawaii Public Housing Authority.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you. Next, we have the Governor's Office.
Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, Myers Succession Recovery Coordinator, was in on our comments.
All right. Anyone else wishing to testify? SCR 226, SR 202. All right. Seeing now, we'll go into kind of questions. We'll kind of take both up, SCR 217, SR 193, and SCR 226, SR 202. I guess first up, want to have Luke, or is there someone from Haima? Okay, maybe we'll do have Haima first, and then we can go into the Governor's Office. Thanks for being here.
Ethan Oki for Hawaii Emergency Management.
All right, so Ethan, why don't you kind of go through, I think one of the big things that we are trying to figure out right now is, and I don't know if you can share with us any of the updated NCS numbers. If you have any of that, maybe you can start off and share that with the committee.
Okay. So Chair, Vice Chair, as of this morning, we have 1,350 households in the NCS hotels, as well as 429 that are in the non-reimbursable kind of category. And from there, the NCS task force is still in deliberation, kind of going with that 429 number to kind of reduce it as quickly as possible.
Okay, so how many are in the NCS that are truly ineligible at this point?
So that number, I think was said was, I think they're at 29.
Okay, so that number is still holding.
It fluctuates every day.
Okay.
And I'm not remembering what exactly the number we gave you last time when we spoke,
Okay.
but the number is extremely dynamic.
Okay.
And what was told to me by the task force is that every day the number could go up and go down.
Okay. So we're now at 429 in potentially ineligible category. then, right?
Non-reimbursable.
Okay.
That's the term that I think we keep saying, eligibility versus whether FEMA is going to reimburse us or not. I think that's the phrasing we should start working with. Reimbursable.
Reimbursable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 429 is the non-reimbursable.
So of those 429, we are totally have to pay for that out of the state.
If we were to end today, then that would be where it's at. But we're still plugging away and trying to reduce that number as quickly as possible.
So what is the plan within the next month or two with the 429 as we try and get them out of NCS, but we don't clear up their eligibility standards?
So there's a whole range of issues in regards to this 429,
Okay.
whether it's insurance, whether it's whether they're offered The plan, the NCS transition process was finalized, or I should say agreed upon by the state coordinating officer as well as the federal coordinating officer, where now if they're eligible or if they're reimbursable, then they get 4 opportunities to be offered something, and then they get denied access, or they have to pay for themselves. And then if they're non-reimbursable, then they get 2 chances within the state. But in between each opportunity, the task force with the American Red Cross are approaching these residents to kind of figure out what were some of the reasons why they said no. And with that, they're, trying to not just provide another option, but an option that they would likely pick. So that's now in place. That was a press release was sent out just as much as the response teams are now approaching each individual resident to kind of, okay, this is where we're at, this is what we're going to do, and then provide that structure now.
But so what it sounds like the strategy is we're going to wait to decompress NCS until we can offer them something. Is that the strategy?
That would be I would have to take that back to
Okay.
the administrator to
Okay.
kind of clarify that one.
Okay. Great. Members, any questions? So has the commitments, from your understanding, with FEMA changed at all? So I know at one point we knew that they were going to do 1 temporary housing site for the eligibles. Do we know that if there has been any changes to the plans for an additional site for the eligibles?
For the housing option.
Temporary housing.
That would
options.
that would be to the housing task force to kind of speak
Okay.
on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically right now, HIMA is plans. So we're not sure on what is the timeline of the decompression then out of NCS.
Again, that would be on an administrator to kind of
Okay.
answer that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna try bring the administrator in. So I think we'll try and address that when we can bring him in. Any updates on the FEMA TSA program on how we're pursuing that? Or that's a good question. for
Yeah,
him.
no
Okay.
updates on that.
Okay.
Sorry.
We won't put you in that
Yeah.
predicament. All right. Maybe Luke can come up. Thanks. You want to introduce yourself?
Luke Myers, State Disaster Recovery Coordinator, Office of the Governor.
Okay. Thanks, Luke, for being here. So maybe we can go back to the question of what is in the plans for FEMA at this juncture. What have they committed to us at this point in time?
Yeah, so the FEMA assistance comes in several different mechanisms. One's a rental assistance, one is the continued housing assistance, there's direct lease, and then there's the FEMA group sites. Right now, they are committed to the Kilohana site, about 169 units that they are working on. So that has not changed. We continue to work with the Joint Housing Task Force, with the county and the federal government on a potential second site, but that will depend on the household survivors being eligible for that type of build. So right now they're committed to the 169. The governor and the county have requested up to 1,000, but that is just a request that has been made. And we continue to work with FEMA on housing individuals with that solution set.
Okay. So that potential second site is not confirmed as of yet then? That's still ongoing?
It is an ongoing conversation.
confirmed.
The Kandapali 2020 site would be the potential location for that. The Joint Housing Task Force continues to work with Kandapali and FEMA on that solution set if the numbers do come through.
Okay. Because I think what some folks were a little confused about was that in the mayor's State of the County address, it sounded like it was gonna happen, but I think the status change is probably not changed in terms of status.
That is correct.
Okay.
As of now, FEMA is focused on the Kilohana site. We'd love to see more housing be built by FEMA. If they want to use one site or multiple sites, the state would support that.
Okay. Has there been any discussions on potential infrastructure investments from FEMA, or is it only been in conjunction with their potential temporary housing sites?
It has only been in conjunction with the temporary group sites at this time.
Okay, so there is in the FEMA program, there is no potential, typically there is no potential infrastructure investments then.
Specifically for the housing solutions at the Kaanapali site, they were looking at potential permanent infrastructure if they do a build there. Currently at the Kilohana site, that would be temporary infrastructure. Obviously, FEMA makes other potential investments in infrastructure through the FEMA Stafford Act Public Assistance Program for damages and repairs. There have been conversations with HHFDC because our state build site and the Kilohana site are side by side. If there can be some mutual benefits of trying to leverage some dual infrastructure. Those conversations are underway. We do have HHFDC here or state DHS who may be able to speak to that.
Okay, but that's the extent of the possibilities. All right. So at this point, what is the number of housing units that we're trying to target in the short term?
Yeah, just to build on what Ha'ima mentioned, want to give them a lot of kudos for the NCS task force. There have been a series of community gatherings on Saturdays to engage with those survivors that need housing solutions. So I think all the work that has been done on the recent Saturdays, we're starting to see a very positive progression of that NCS number. So I think that's the good news. To build on that with the housing solutions, our first alternative is to use the rental assistance program through state DHS. And then second, we'd be looking at the state group site as we move further out in time, particularly the third quarter of this year. So as those NCS numbers come down, the idea is to use the rental assistance program as that bridge furthermore throughout this year and then eventually over to the group site. Our immediate goal is about 450 units at the state DHS site, but the governor has challenged us to be able to find up to 1,000 units. Right now, we're just in preliminary kind of looking at potential sites that would get us from the 450 number to 1,000.
Okay, so you said third quarter. That's the new time frame for the group site.
That's July. That's July of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's been pretty consistent.
Yeah, third quarter is pretty consistent. Again, I'll defer to state DHS on specifics of where they are currently.
Okay. So so I think that's for right now that's the short-term goals of figuring out what to do with the NCS and decompressing NCS. Has there been any further discussions about the concern of a potential FEMA cliff come February 10th, 2025? And what is our thinking of how we're going to address that? Or is it a concern, or do you believe FEMA will adequately address some of the ongoing market concerns?
Yeah, I think that for those that are FEMA eligible between rental assistance, continued rental assistance, and direct lease, there are opportunities between Administrator Barros and the Federal Coordinating Officer to make a request to extend beyond February 2025, as long as we can show that the survivors are looking for housing solutions. So we do acknowledge the housing cliff in February 2025. We'll also be building on the 1,000 state units that we have are going to be building through state DHS and other solutions. So hopefully we'll be able to bring that cliff down a little bit. We do acknowledge the rental market in Maui is tight, and it will probably get tighter as we move into the second and third quarter of next year.
So are there concerns about those that are on rental assistance versus a FEMA direct lease? Because I think part of what I've been told is that FEMA is not adjusting what the rental assistance is, and therefore someone, either philanthropy or some other program in the state, is closing the gap in terms of trying to make that rental assistance work. And for me, that seems like a little bit concerning, because we're using resources on a FEMA eligible person that could be going to some other aspects of the rebuild. So what has been the conversation on closing that gap?
Yeah, so there are about 4,000 survivors who have households who have received rental assistance. About 800 have received continued housing assistance. So they've been able to actually show that they have a rental agreement to continue on. Again, acknowledging the rental market in Maui, that's going to continue to be a challenge as we move forward. The directed lease option provides FEMA a little more length in those terms because they can go out 12 to 18 months. And provide a little more safe and secure housing for those individuals. So just because someone received that initial rental assistance doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to find another rental agreement. So through the disaster case management process, as those households come forward, hopefully we'll be able to identify potential housing solutions for them, whether it's in West Maui, Maui, or maybe throughout the state.
So if you can't find something on your own through the rental assistance program, will FEMA take you on in the direct lease program?
Each of those programs have different eligibility requirements.
Okay.
And so that would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
So generally, maybe not.
Generally, maybe not.
Okay, so we haven't necessarily figured out that rental assistance gap then.
Right. Not all of those households that received the 4,000 plus households that received the initial rental assistance have come back looking for a housing solution. About 2,500 or so have moved over to the direct lease or the FEMA build housing solutions. We've got about 1,500 that may have found a resource on their own. There's about close to 500 that told FEMA that they didn't need assistance. So each of these survivors, as they move through their recovery processes, is one, being provided the federal assistance opportunities. But we do know a number of households who have either found something on their own or just moved on.
So are they not taking FEMA assistance, or they're just taking whatever FEMA gives and then they're figuring out the rest on their own?
Effectively, for those 2,000 households, they have told the federal government that they don't need any assistance.
Anything?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay.
As we build capacity in the disaster case management program through state DHS, that will be an additional fabric to kind of see where these households are as we project out to February 2025. Working very closely with DHS so we can stand up that capacity. So, maybe those households, they couldn't get a rental. They told FEMA that they may not want a direct lease for whatever reason, but maybe we get into the third or fourth quarter this year, maybe they show up with a housing need. And the disaster case management process kind of will help identify some potential resources for them. But right now, effectively, those households have told the federal government, we don't need any assistance.
And they're not in NCS, so it's kind of like they're kind of doing their own thing then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Members, any questions for Luke? All right. Thanks, Luke. Maybe we can bring up Department of Human Services. We can pivot to the temporary housing solutions that Luke was mentioning. Thank you, Deputy Directors, for being here. And I appreciate all of your hard work on trying to get some housing solutions figured out for those who are in NCS. Maybe what you could do is just start off giving us a overview of where you're at the moment. I know we talked a little bit in WAM about when you started off, but I think we'd be curious to see where you're at. Maybe it's been a couple weeks at least since that last info briefing.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Joseph Campos, Deputy Director, Department of Human Services. Thank you for having us here today. Also, Deputy Director Sphere, and she'll be able to answer some more specific questions about the RAP program, which Luke Myers got into a little bit. Currently, I am happy to report that there is progress being made on the site that we are calling Kala'iola. Kala'iola was gifted to us the name by Kumuhula Pueopata, and it means a place of peaceful recovery. And the state hopes that this will be a place where people can peacefully recover and start to heal. So I am happy to report that the civil plans were submitted on Friday, and the county is doing an expedited review. So we are ready to move come April 1st with the beginning phase of the site work. which will be crushing approximately 40,000 cubic yards of boulders. And the crushing will create fill that we can then utilize in the grading process. And that will help both save us money as well as expedite, the transportation, because it's going to be right on site. We don't have to import fill. And so we are at the point of houses have been ordered, the units. We are anticipating delivery of the units in May or June. And the actual site, because of certain delays, originally we had hoped when we were looking at the Launiupoko site that we would be able to accommodate people as soon as the extension for the NCS program terminated. Unfortunately, because of the move from Launiupoko to the Leali'i property, we are about 2 months delayed. We are looking at a process time frame of about July, August. In addition, as we develop, we're sort of doing it in 3 phases. The property at Leali'i, right, Kalai'ola, there's basically a rock field right in the middle of the property. So to the right of it, to the left of it, we are doing phase 1A. And then to the right of it, we're doing phases 1B and 1C. GBI, Goodfellow Brothers Incorporated, will be doing the site work. And they are actually bringing in a second crew from the Big Island to help expedite the process. And so we will be doing the left and right simultaneously. And as soon as there are spaces to put houses, we will be putting houses. And as soon as the infrastructure is ready, we'll be able to start moving people in.
So site work begins April 1st. So
yes.
that's a target, or that's confirmed?
That's confirmed.
Okay.
Pending any issues with, contracts.
So the county is allowing you to proceed with site work as you figure out the structures. Is that correct?
The structures?
The infrastructure for the
The infrastructure, yeah. So that's all in the civil plan.
Okay.
The grading has all of the civil plan has the grading as well as, the utility work as included in it.
Okay. So in that timeline, so how long is site work anticipated?
So it's anticipated through July, August, September. So phase 1C will probably be in September.
Okay, so first phase, what do you anticipate?
We anticipate first phase to be July, August, and that will be the 270 homes that were initially ordered.
Okay.
And then the additional 180 will be August, September.
Okay. So you're confident though that the site work will be done. So when do you anticipate site work to be done, and then you can start putting on some type of structure?
So as
for let's talk just phase 1 for now.
For phase 1, so we'll do phase 1A. Hopefully the site work can be done by middle of July. And, as soon as it's ready, we will then put homes there.
So when you mean site work, that's also infrastructure by middle of July?
Yes.
Okay. And then how long will it take to construct the structures?
So because they're modular, usually it'll take about a day or 2 days to get a unit hooked up.
Okay.
But they'll be having multiple teams working on them. So it's not going to take, 270 days to hook them up.
Okay.
Right. They're going to be getting put up as soon as possible. And multiple teams will be working on utilizing or, installing multiple homes at a time.
Okay. And what's your anticipation of actually getting the structure up?
July, August.
No. But how long is your anticipation that you budgeted for a structure to go up?
So each structure is between a day and 2 days to hook up and get it set on the foundation.
Okay. And then what else do you need to add to that to get it to be move-in ready?
They're already moved. All the, furniture will be there. The kitchenware, sheets, everything
will be done in 1 to 2 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, see, why I question that is because if you take a look at something like, what Kapalua is doing with TY, right? They had no infrastructure. or I shouldn't say infrastructure. They should say no site work. They didn't need to put in infrastructure, and they broke ground President's Day weekend,
Yeah.
and they still aren't going to be done until July, they say.
Okay.
So I'm looking at that timeline and then overlaying it with your timeline, but your timeline is that you're going to do site work all the way up until July, and then you're going to do what they have to do, and you're going to say it's only taking a day or two. So I'm just asking, is that realistic
Yeah,
based on
so-
what they're trying to do versus what we're trying to do, unless we're doing something very drastically different?
Well, so first of all, we are having 2 teams work on the site.
Okay.
It is my understanding as well that they're actually going to be working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day.
On site work or
On site
for-
work.
Okay.
So we're speeding that up.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
And
but I'm
then-
talking, we don't even have site work. Like TY had no site work, right?
Right.
Practically
Yeah.
anything, right? So
Okay.
we minus that out, but we just talked about once our site work is done, what is the next phase on?
So the next
getting
phase
things
is
done,
then
right?
to install the homes.
Right.
And part of the site work is also going to be the foundations for each of the homes, right? So then it's
Okay.
just placing the home, hooking it up, and moving to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should look at that. I don't know if it's going to take 1 to 2 days. Maybe we need to.
Well, and that's why I said multiple teams, right? So maybe in the whole scope of it, the 270 homes might take 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But that's why we are going to be really expediting the whole process.
Well, I think the bottom line is we just want an accurate timeline.
Correct.
So maybe you shouldn't promise 1 to 2 days if it's going to take, a little longer than that.
Right, 1 to 2 days per home, right? With multiple per unit,
Right.
with multiple teams working on it. And then throughout, 270 homes have to get installed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for your temporary homes, there is no holdup in getting those to Hawaii then.
Currently, there's no holdup, there's no supply chain issues. In fact, one of them, Factory OS, I believe they're already done with the first phase of the completion. And I think we ordered 110, so it's about 55 units that are ready
Okay.
to be shipped.
Okay. But they're
Yeah.
not on the ship yet.
Not on the ship yet.
Okay.
No, and it'll take about 4 weeks to get here once it goes on the ship.
Okay. And when do you anticipate them starting to ship?
So because we don't want them just sitting around,
Okay.
we're actually looking at possibly having them ship within the next month. So 30 days out
Okay.
from now.
Okay.
Now, I believe at one point you had asked in one of the other informational briefings if there's places that we can temporarily set up.
Mhm.
One site would be the 5 acres above Lahaina Civic Center,
Mhm.
which is very flat. I think
Mhm.
they use it currently for overflow parking.
Mhm.
In looking at that, we could do temporary setup there.
Mhm.
It would all be above ground infrastructure.
Mhm.
The cost to set it up would be about $5 million.
Mhm.
The budget cannot absorb that cost. So if that was something that would, the Senate would want to look at, it would require an additional funding portion.
Well, I think the concern is if we're going to get these in, right? And I think you're trying to delay the shipments now, but I think once we get them, I don't think anybody wants to see it just sitting anywhere.
Right, exactly.
Right? And I think part of it is as long as we have a broader strategy of how we're going to decompress NCS, I think we're saying you go do what you got to do, but our bottom line is we want to decompress NCS.
Correct. So do
Right.
we. Yeah.
And so I think if there is no other options to be in the interim, then we got to figure out what those options are, right? To decompress NCS. So
Right.
if Trista here is figure it out, what we're going to do with all these people in the interim while you get yours up, then I'm fine. At least you have a strategy. But I think what we're worried about is we have no strategy, so we're just going to keep them in NCS. But I don't know. Between the two of you, hopefully that's been worked out, I assume.
Yeah, we do have a strategy, and they'll go into short-term wrap, and Deputy Director Spear can talk about that program.
Okay. All right. So bottom line, we're looking still July, August then,
Correct.
and that's a pretty firm timeline.
That is what I've been told.
And then
Yes.
what are the updates on your budgetary numbers?
So the budget is still the same.
Okay. Why don't you go over what those numbers are? for
Yeah,
us?
so it's going to be $115,052,000 And so basically it increased by 52,831.
Okay.
Okay, so 115,052,831.
Okay. And what's the breakdown on that?
So the breakdown on that is the actual homes are, let me find it. Okay, I don't have it totaled, but basically 54 million, just doing quick math. The horizontal construction work, which includes site work and infrastructure, is 41.8 million. Community buildings and miscellaneous is 6 million. Hard construction cost contingency is 2.6 million. Then we have the rock crushing, which will be 2.6 million. Recreation and miscellaneous site amenities is 750,000. Landscaping is 560,000. Wayfinding, 700,000. Site logistics is 256,000. And then there are additional development costs and land costs or soft costs, which is equal to 9,900,000.
Soft costs?
That's all of the architect, engineer, architect of record, plumbing engineer, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, structural engineer, soil investigation, archaeological monitoring, community relations, drone consultant photos, soft costs, reimbursable expenses, and a soft cost contingency. And then development costs, project and construction management, accounting administration, development, reimbursable expenses, and development cost contingencies.
Okay. All right. So how is the community outreach been going?
Yeah, let's see, on February 20th, I had a meeting with beneficiaries that was set up by Council Member Paulton. Then on the 27th, I believe, or then the 21st was the Wednesday meetings that the mayor has. So I presented, no, I didn't present then, I presented on the 28th to the community. Just yesterday, I was at the DHHL commissioners meeting. We presented it there as well. We have a consulting company helping us, and they are doing outreach currently. There is a website called kalai'ola.org, No'okina, and that is a place where people can ask questions. It's a very sparse website. We just put it up last week, but it'll be much more robust within the next week or so.
Okay.
Yeah, so and then we are going to be having community meetings, as things progress, probably going to be about once a week, just so that people can express any concerns they have. Right now, the main concern is traffic and, the congestion that an additional 450 units will bring. In addition, DHHL will be doing fast work on their Leali'i Phase 1B, which will be another 181 homes. So then that increases now. And then, of course, the FEMA build, which is currently slated for the property right to the right of us, that will be 169 homes.
Because where is your access point?
So our access point will be both Leali'i Parkway as well as Fleming Road.
Okay.
So Fleming will be the secondary. The primary will be Leali'i Parkway.
Okay.
FEMA's primary will be Fleming Road, and the secondary will be Leali'i Parkway. In addition, I have asked Director Ed Sniffen to assist me in the development of this project. I am not a developer, far from it. A lot of the things that are said are Greek to me, and so Director Sniffen has been extremely helpful, and he is also, helping guide this project along.
Okay. So all the roadway issues, that's being worked out with him?
That is.
Okay.
Yeah. And the community as well.
And that's going to be permanent upgrades, or is that all temporary for the roadways?
That'll be permanent upgrades. And because the main point is to eventually have this turn over to DHHL for the beneficiaries.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of the work that we are doing infrastructure wise will be permanent.
Okay. What is the anticipation of any of the infrastructure needs, water, sewer?
So right now, I was informed yesterday that on sewer, there's 2 points that we're going to be accessing, but towards the bottom near the highway, the slope becomes very shallow, or it's a gentle slope. So there was concern that it might not have enough pressure, and it could possibly back up. But I believe they've developed a solution for that, and they're going to do some laterals or something to that effect. I'll have to get you more information about that.
Okay. But that's
That's
been agreed upon by the county,
Correct.
and they're okay with that.
yes.
Okay.
The county is the one that brought it to our attention, the wastewater division.
And then the water capacity is
And
fine.
water will be, both wastewater as well as water will be connected to the county lines.
So that's a temporary use then.
For now, with the intent that it will be dedicated back to the county.
Right.
Right.
But I would assume any new source of water, that's temporary source, right?
No, so we are actually part of the 10 million that we are getting from HHFDC was allocated to improve the water infrastructure at
No,
Lehi.
I'm not talking about infrastructure. I'm
Okay.
talking about allocation of water.
Yeah, so
So you're using county water,
We're
which is
using
a
county
temporary
water.
allocation. But at some point, we're gonna have to figure out if
If
we
it
turn it
gets- right.
over,
Okay.
DHHL will have to go and get, I would assume, a permanent source of allocation, which they'll get first choice, but they still
Right.
gotta go to the water allocation.
yeah, and I don't know, can you answer that?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So that's been figured out though on a temporary basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also believe permanent, right? No.
It's temporary.
All right, and then FEMA's using the same lines, or they're doing separate lines?
FEMA is separate.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So I think we'll just continue seeing if you can hit the target of April 1st. I think that,
Okay, wait, that's not April 1st.
no, just to begin.
to start.
Yes,
Okay, all right.
yes. Because if you don't begin, we're not even gonna get
Okay,
anywhere, right?
good. You just meant, I wanted to make sure that we were clear.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think as long as we can get started and
Yeah.
you stay on budget, and you deliver the units, I think everyone's happy. I think
Yeah.
it's just a matter of, can you get started by that time? So
Yeah.
I think we gotta just know if we are not started by that time, then we gotta make sure that what's the holdup. So
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So I think so that's the strategy coming in through hopefully July, August, September to find the housing unit. Now, Deputy Director, what's the strategy until that point? And how quickly can we get those people moved and decompress NCS?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The strategy, if you will, for the rental assistance program is what it has always been, to as quickly and effectively and efficiently transition survivors into an interim housing solution utilizing Airbnbs and this innovative approach as led by the governor with this $17.5 million of funding. As stated, that $17.5 million is sufficient at the rates, at the maximum rates, right, that we've discussed in detail before, which I'm happy to go into today if you want, but that was sufficient for approximately 200 households. If we were able to continue to beat, if you will, right, or come in at an average rate less than those maximums, then that would increase from 200 up and up and up. Right now, we have completed 144 bookings for a total of 113 households, which comprises 321 individuals into housing. A majority of those stays are for long-term stays, so right around the 12-month mark, as intended by this rental assistance program. We are continuing to see a decrease in the average nightly rate, so it looks as though we are trending in the right direction to, with the $17.5 million, be able to service more than 200 households. The strategy, if you will, we are working closely with HOU, who has an eligibility team established to determine which households in NCS are eligible for the state rental assistance program. And if they are eligible for, I'm not going to go into all the criteria today, and I wouldn't want to sit in for HOU and speak for them, right, in those eligibility determinations, but we work closely with them. So households that are not receiving FEMA direct lease, those households who are not receiving FEMA rental assistance. Additionally, those households, as originally designed, this RAP program was for households that are not receiving any other form of rental assistance. There are households, though, that are receiving some form of, say, insurance or other rental assistance. So we are looking and strategizing to expand the RAP program, if you will, to try and decompress, as you say, non-congregate sheltering into a longer-term interim solution. Right now, for example, today, over 100 households have been referred to GEM to book. As we work with the HOU eligibility team to determine, streamline, and expedite that process, we're able to transition those households over. I appreciate the concern and perhaps frustration by some members of the Senate with why isn't this process going fast enough? It doesn't seem like it should be that hard. We do as a state need to be very careful to protect our financial interests and to be fiscally conservative. Yes, transitioning them out is important, but we want to make sure that those households that we deem eligible for this program are not households that would otherwise be eligible for FEMA, because if we would book them into this program by mistake per se, then perhaps they would for a short time lose their FEMA eligibility. The state could then be on the hook for that 12-month booking or the like. So we're trying to balance all aspects of this financial responsibility that we have. And so we are seeing a lot of success. Like I said, we're expediting that just today alone. Like I said, over 100 households were referred to GEM. GEM has increased their capacity, so they're standing by ready and willing. Another piece that will help facilitate this is the call center that we've just stood up in the last week for the disaster case management program. So we're encouraging all survivors to call 211 and seek a follow-up call from a disaster case management program team member to start getting them on the wait list. They will then have someone to be matched to help navigate their care through this. We're also encouraging survivors, if they receive communication from the Red Cross team, a letter or a text message or whatnot, to reach out to Global Empowerment Mission because they've been deemed eligible for the RAP program, to call GEM back or to either return a call from GEM or to reach out and talk to them. Because the faster that GEM is able to make contact with the survivors to facilitate that booking process, the faster that we're going to be able to transition those households. To date, in addition, we have over 116 properties that are currently in inventory, more being called every day. So we continue to ask any owners of short-term rentals that do not currently provide a home to existing residents of Maui to please email dhswrap@globalempowermentmission.org to put their house into this program, or they can visit helpingmaui.org/offer and register their home with the GEM program there.
So how many more are we looking for?
Currently, right now, we are looking for approximately 500 more properties. Now you're probably wondering, how are you asking for 500 more properties if you just testified that the $17.5 million was only sufficient to 200 households? As you know, the governor is committed to identifying a housing solution for all. So some of this is we may need to come back and ask for more funding or more appropriation. But right now, we can't book anyone if we don't have inventory. If we have inventory, but we don't have survivors that have been deemed eligible, right? So this is an innovative approach. We're working, like I said, closely with HOU, as well as our FEMA team, the Red Cross team, and the GEM team.
So out of the, let's see, 429 that's left,
yes.
Are we anticipating we need to find all 429, or is there a kind of a anticipation of that 429? We only maybe need to do half of that 429, so we might get half of that on the eligible list, or are we, or does the because you said you need 500 more properties, we know we're just going to try and house all the 429 at some point.
So I always want to be ready, willing, and able to meet the needs of the survivors. So I would ask property owners to throw their hat in the ring, so to speak, to participate in this program. If the RAP program isn't able to use it, we are working with CNHA to make sure that they could perhaps utilize that inventory for one of their housing programs or another possible housing solution that is out there. We're also working with MEO for those recipients of the TANF, Maui TANF relief benefits to identify one of these properties as a housing solution. Also, the Hawai'i property that is coming online is approximately 170 units that also could be utilized. So out of that 429 that we're still looking at, Senator, if you want to take 429 and subtract 170, that leaves a remaining population, or excuse me, a remaining possible inventory size. But again, Hawai'i may not be the right solution set for a particular individual, just as one of these properties may or may not be the right solution set. So that's the best answer.
What do you think the timeline is? Understanding that you still got to recruit more, right? But we, in theory, our contract ends with American Red Cross on April 10th.
Correct.
What is, are we looking to then extend NCS a little longer so that you have more time to accommodate the folks that you need to accommodate?
I can't speak to that question, but what I can speak to is in September, when we were booking survivors into the Airbnbs for the 30-day extension, DHS working in conjunction with GEM was able to make between 15 to 35 bookings a day.
Okay.
And so at that volume or that pace, we booked over 300 households into an Airbnb property in approximately 3 weeks. So we've worked with GEM. They've increased their staffing levels now to be more commensurate or to mirror what those staffing levels were in September. So DHS is standing ready, willing, and able to receive those less of eligible households and get them booked in as quickly as possible.
So I think the bottom line, what we need to figure out, and maybe this is why we have to bring in someone from HOUMA, is we need to figure out what is the timeline of when HOUMA is going to release, right? Because I think there is a bottom line question of, if you release them too early, we're on the hook for the whole time, I would assume, or and which we don't want. We want to work through the HOUMA issues, but we don't want to, as a state, take them on if there's a potential we can get a reimbursement from FEMA, right?
Correct.
So you're kind of waiting for their release from HOUMA to then place them, I guess. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, because we want to make sure that we've exhausted everything through FEMA before placing them into your program.
Yes, while also balancing the need to focus on what is the long-term interim housing plan going to be for this household, since obviously NCS, whether they are eligible for FEMA reimbursement at that 90-10 split or otherwise, that is where we need to go as a state.
Right.
I'm happy to report back in approximately a week or two if you would like to see where we stand on, since today was a big day, if you will, for referrals to GEM. I'm happy to report back as to where we are a week from today of that list of just over 100 households, how many we've
Okay, so today was a big referral.
Today was a big referral day. This morning, as of 8 a.m., there were 46 households, excuse me. I was trying to do math in my head. That's not always a good combo. There were 46 households that were referred over. And by midday today, there was another, I believe, 89 households. So that equals about 135.
So all ineligibles and NCS ineligibles, or are there
for
others?
PA reimbursement? Yes.
Okay. So it's moving.
It's moving.
So that
yes.
for potentially that 400 number will go down within the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Okay. So at least we're going in the right direction. That's good to hear.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have, I think it's as of today, 79 households are in inventory ready to book today. So it's going to be a matter of how quickly can we make contact with these 135 households, let them know that they're eligible, sit down, engage with them, match them with the property, and then get that moved in.
Great. Okay. Members, any questions for DHS? All right, seeing none, thank you. Thanks for being here. All right, last up is HHFDC. So I think we wanted HHFDC here because we wanted to just see what their role was in some of the short-term housing and then some of the long-term housing. So Dean, maybe you want to give us an overview of what you've been working on.
Okay, I'll start first with the Hawai'i property. That project requires council approval because it is a partnership with Maui County where they will eventually take a leasehold interest in the property. So it's up for second reading at the council this Friday. We anticipate closing on the property on March 28th, and we're working on a property management contract with a operator who will manage the property, including providing services for the occupants of the property. So we expect to close on March 28th. It'll take us about a month to set up the property, put in some common area laundry systems, take care of some life safety measures, and the hotel could be occupied by survivors starting on about May 1st. And working with DHS, Trista and Joe on identifying the population who could move into Hawai'i.
Okay, and what is the potential cost to get that all set up?
The potential cost, we're using the CIP funds that were appropriated last year for the acquisition and initial life safety improvements. It'll cost about $500,000 per month to operate the facility. And this includes having a property manager to maintain the facilities, provide intake services, basically be a resident manager for the property.
So I assume we're going to try and get as much NCS ineligibles in there. And then if we don't, fill it with those folks, what's the strategy for filling the rest of it in the interim?
Then we could offer it to contractors helping with the Lahaina rebuild, to other government agencies who are providing services for the response effort. We don't anticipate there being a difficulty in finding people who need accommodations.
But the property manager is prepared and
Yes.
willing and able to do that
Yes,
and be able to pivot.
that is part of their scope of services.
Okay. All right. So May 1st then.
May 1st.
Okay. Okay. April 1st, May 1st, we're all hitting these deadlines. All right. What about some of the larger scale projects as you go into some of the longer term rebuild? So I guess to set it up, you are pretty much in charge of the longer term housing, right? Recovery
Yes.
for the state.
So at Leali, for example, we're working with DHS primarily on installing permanent infrastructure so that can be used by DHHO in the future for permanent housing. So as you noted, the allocation that we're getting for water and sewer right now is only a temporary allocation, because for water, the system was already maxed out at capacity. So they could only provide temporary capacity. At some point, we or DHHO will have to install another groundwater well. And it's something that we've been working with DHHO on for the past several years. We're going to have to work on that for the next 5 years to get that up and running, so that there is additional capacity, so that permanent capacity for Leali can be provided. And so what we're doing right now is, I guess, assisting on the state side for the Kalai'ola project on the infrastructure design, which includes installing a new upper level water system, a new water tank that's going to be installed up the mountain. So it's substantial work that has to be done. And on the sewer side, there is a need to address, I would say, a commitment that the county required us to enter into when the Kaiulukukuia project was built. There's an MOA which the county required, basically stating that the state would have to build a private sewer treatment plant at Leali'i for any further development at Leali'i. And we feel that should be revisited, given that the state seems to be in a position to give money to the counties for infrastructure work. So the county should use that to upgrade its existing facility to allow a permanent connection at Leali'i.
So the sewer connection that we have now, it's so that they're just granting that on a temporary
On a
basis.
temporary basis also.
Okay. So if once this is all done, said and done, and if we want to do more permanent infrastructure, or I guess permanent development, what the infrastructure that we needed is, we then have to potentially comply with what the county wants for sewer, and then the water situation with allocation. But I guess, is the infrastructure that we're installing now, is that sufficient for future use, and then we can figure out the particulars of all this other stuff, or is that all
Yes,
pretty
that is the
temporary?
intent that as it's being built, it'll be dedicated to a county. So even while it's being
So it
used,
should be up to code at this
it should be
point.
up to code.
Okay.
So even the roads, we're not installing curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and
Right.
streetlights, but the right of way width meets the county requirements. So that in the future, we can install curb, gutter, sidewalks and whatnot to county standard.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we have to work with the county to figure out what is the long-term strategy
Yes.
then versus just the short term. All right. Other than that area, what else are you working on?
We also are trying to rebuild the Front Street apartments, the Haina Surf condominium complex, and the Pigilani homes are, they're all in one cluster. We think that that could be one of the first multifamily projects to be built in the Burn area. And we anticipate to award a lease hopefully in the next few months so that design can commence. Working on expediting existing projects that we have financed in the past. So that's about roughly 700 homes that we anticipate being completed by June 30th of next year. Not in Lahaina, they're in Wailuku area, but it is housing units that could supplement the additional the current stock.
Okay, so that's in progress.
That's in progress.
Okay. Well, what is the timeline of your Front Street apartment area?
We anticipate awarding a lease, say, by June of this year. The area is within the special management area, so it will be a lengthy permitting process. Probably couldn't break ground for another 2 years as the project would have to apply for financing also.
So completion best
3
scenario.
or 4 years.
Okay.
Best case 3 years, likely 4
Okay,
years.
so that's why the temporary housing solutions is kind of important in the
Yes.
interim before we get into the permanent.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, members, I guess. Any questions? You're good? All right. Thank you, Dean, for being here. All right, well, thank you everyone for the information. I think what we want to do before we pass this reso out is we're going to want to hear from Haima one last time on some of the broader strategies. So both resos we're going to defer, as I mentioned at the beginning. We're going to defer till Thursday, March 28th at 1 p.m. to facilitate further discussion, mainly on Haima. And I think I think the administrator is planning to be here. So until that point, we will adjourn or recess the meeting. I'm not sure. Are we recessing or adjourning? We're going to repost. So we're going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone.